Chapter 1: The First Quiet Encounter. There are some paintings that do not greet us with light. They do not invite us in with beauty that reassures, or with order that settles the mind. They wait instead in a kind of hushed tension, asking us not to admire them too quickly. Akseli Gallen-Kallella's The Lovers belongs to that quieter, more troubling kind of encounter. At first glance, it seems to offer an image as old as memory itself, two human beings drawn together in intimacy, bodies close, faces near, the ancient gravity of one person reaching toward another. Yet almost immediately, something in the scene resists tenderness. The embrace is real, but peace is absent. The closeness is undeniable, but so is danger. And there, between them, where warmth should gather and where trust should deepen, lies the unmistakable interruption of a sword. It is this single detail that changes everything. A sword is never neutral. It carries the history of violence, honor, punishment, severance, sacrifice. It belongs to conflict even when it remains still. When placed inside an image of love, it does not merely decorate the scene, it contaminates it, or perhaps reveals what was already there. Suddenly the lovers do not seem sheltered from the world. They seem exposed to its oldest truth, that devotion and vulnerability are inseparable, that to love another person is also to place oneself near the possibility of grief. The sword does not simply threaten the figures in the painting. It threatens the illusion that love can ever remain untouched by fear. The longer one looks, the more the painting feels less like a scene and more like a state of being. It is not a narrative in the ordinary sense. We do not know what happened just before this moment, and we do not know what will happen just after. No clear explanation is offered. There is no comforting frame around the image, no anecdotal clue that would allow us to say, this is a myth, this is a legend, this is a tragedy already safely completed. Instead, we are kept inside uncertainty. The painting asks us to remain there, in that narrow and uneasy space where affection does not cancel danger, and desire does not abolish sorrow. The darkness of the work deepens this feeling. Gallen-Kallela does not build a world of airy surfaces or decorative charm. The tones are heavy, inward, almost burdened. The lines seem to hold their weight rather than release it. We are not drifting through a dream of romantic union, we are standing before something more difficult, more adult, more unprotected. Love here is not innocence. It is not youthful rapture, not flirtation, not the easy language of sentimental promise. It is a force already touched by the knowledge of endings. It is closeness under pressure. It is longing that already suspects its own wound. This is why the painting lingers in the mind long after the eye moves away. It does not flatter our hopes. It reminds us of an older emotional truth, one that many people spend a lifetime trying not to name. To love is not merely to receive comfort. It is to become permeable. It is to allow another presence to enter the center of one's inner life, where loss can do the greatest damage. Gallen-Kallela seems to understand that the most powerful images of love are not always the ones that celebrate serenity. Sometimes the more honest image is the one that admits contradiction. The lovers are together, and yet something sharp divides them. They are united, and yet a threat remains. Their embrace is sincere, but it cannot dissolve what human existence always carries within it, fragility. And perhaps this is why the painting feels so quiet. Not because nothing is happening, but because what is happening is too profound for spectacle. The emotional pitch is not loud. It is compressed. The silence around the figures becomes part of the meaning. In that silence, viewers begin to bring their own memory to the work. One thinks of the strange nearness of joy and fear in every deep attachment. One remembers how quickly tenderness can become grief when time, betrayal, illness, distance, or death enters the room. One realizes that the sword is not only an object inside the painting. It is also a symbol for everything that lovers never fully control. The painting was created across the years between 1906 and 1917, and that span itself seems meaningful. It feels as though the image belongs not to a single instant but to a long inward weather, something contemplated over time rather than simply observed. Gallen-Kallela, known above all as one of Finland's most important painters and for the monumental power of his work related to the Kalevala, turns here toward something more intimate and psychologically exposed. The scale of national myth gives way to the scale of human contradiction. The heroic distance of legend recedes. What remains is the emotional life of two people, and the invisible pressures surrounding them. In that sense, the painting does not merely depict lovers. It studies the condition of loving. It observes what happens when desire meets consciousness, when intimacy meets mortality, when the wish to merge with another person meets the stubborn fact that pain cannot be banished from the human bond. It is an image of union, yes, but a union shadowed by the knowledge that every human closeness carries within it a possible breaking. That is why the work feels symbolic without ever becoming abstract. Its symbols arise naturally from the emotional structure of life itself. And so the first encounter with the lovers becomes less an act of viewing than an act of recognition. We may not know these figures, but we know the atmosphere around them. We know the trembling contradiction of wanting another person completely while fearing what such wanting can cost. We know that the deepest tenderness often lives beside the deepest vulnerability. We know, too, that some truths are better spoken in image than in language. Gallen-Kallela does not explain love. He places us before its divided heart. In that still and haunted embrace, under the weight of dark tones and heavy lines, he offers no remedy. He offers only the image itself, and the slow realization that what we are looking at is not just romance darkened by danger, but human attachment revealed in its most honest and unsettling form. Chapter 2: The World It Emerged From. To understand the emotional gravity of the lovers, it helps to imagine the world from which it emerged, not merely the dates between 1906 and 1917, but the inward climate of those years, the spiritual weather of an era that often seemed to stand between certainty and collapse. This was a time when Europe, in many places, was no longer fully convinced by the old assurances. Faith still existed, tradition still cast its long shadow, and beauty was still made with devotion, but beneath the surface there was a growing sense that the inherited language of order no longer explained the whole of human experience. Art began to turn more insistently toward the hidden life, dreams, impulses, fears, symbols, obsessions, private longings, and forms of truth that did not easily submit to reason. It was within this larger atmosphere that symbolism flourished, and Gallen-Kallella's connection to that movement is deeply relevant here. Symbolism was not interested in describing the world only as it appeared. It wanted to suggest what lay beneath appearance, the emotional undertow, the psychological echo, the unseen correspondence between outer image and inner state. In symbolist art, objects become charged. A flower is never just a flower. A garment is not merely cloth. A gesture is not only bodily movement. The visible world becomes a language through which the invisible speaks. This is precisely the kind of world the lovers inhabits. Its sword is not just steel. Its embrace is not just posture. Its darkness is not merely color. Everything in the painting seems to stand for more than itself. Yet this inward turn in art did not arise from abstraction alone. It reflected a broader crisis in how human beings understood themselves. Modern life was altering rhythms, beliefs, and expectations. The old villages of certainty were giving way to more fractured and restless conditions. Public life could be grand, but inward life felt increasingly unstable. The human being was no longer imagined simply as a moral soul moving through a meaningful order. More and more, people sensed themselves as divided creatures, torn between instinct and restraint, desire and duty, hope and disillusionment. In such a world, love could no longer be painted only as harmony. It had to be shown as a conflict of forces, a vulnerable intensity, a bond haunted by contradiction. For an artist like Gallen-Kallela, whose work had helped shape cultural identity and whose imagination had long engaged with epic narrative, this changing world opened another kind of subject. The heroic and the national were powerful, but the personal could be equally immense. In the mythology of a people, one finds collective memory. In the drama of lovers, one finds the structure of the human heart. If epic art gives form to shared destiny, psychological art gives form to the battles no one else can fully see. The shift from the large narrative world of the Kalevala toward more intimate themes was not a retreat into smallness. It was a movement toward another depth, one closer to the pulse of ordinary sorrow and desire. The years surrounding the creation of the lovers also carried a strong awareness of instability. Across the cultural imagination, there was a heightened sense that civilization itself stood on uncertain ground. Beauty in this atmosphere often took on a melancholy intensity, as though artists were trying to preserve or interrogate something that could not be securely held. Love, under such conditions, ceased to be a simple refuge. It became a charged territory in which longing, fear, dependence, eros, sacrifice, and destruction could all coexist. The very idea of human union began to feel less like a solution and more like a mystery. This helps explain why the painting does not offer sentimental clarity. It belongs to a world that had grown suspicious of easy consolations. The lovers are not arranged before us as moral examples or decorative ideals. They are drawn into a condition. They embody a truth more troubling than romance, that the things human beings desire most intensely are often the very things that expose them most completely. In times of emotional and spiritual uncertainty, love becomes not simply a sweetness to be celebrated but a test of what the self can bear. There is also something northern in the emotional architecture of the work, not in any superficial regional sense, but in its restraint, its seriousness, its refusal of theatrical excess. The painting does not erupt, it broods. Its power comes from compression. One feels in it a culture of inwardness, a reverence for silence, an acceptance that some of the deepest human experiences cannot be made fully legible. The figures do not perform emotion for us. They exist inside it. This gives the painting its nocturnal dignity. It does not explain itself because the world from which it emerged did not believe that the soul could be so easily translated. And still, even within this atmosphere of complexity, the painting remains unmistakably human rather than merely intellectual. It is not an essay in symbolic form. It is a felt image. The era gave artists permission to be more psychologically daring, but what matters in The Lovers is not theory. It is that Gallen-Kallela found a visual structure equal to a difficult emotional truth. The world around him had become more conscious of fracture, more alert to ambiguity, more willing to admit that beauty and danger might share the same chamber. The painting absorbs that awareness and gives it intimate shape. If we step back for a moment, we can sense how different this is from many earlier traditions of representing love. In more reassuring visions, lovers are placed in gardens, under benign skies, within harmonious architectures of blessing. Even when obstacles appear, the ideal remains intact. Here, the obstacle is not external. It lies within the very scene of union. The sword does not interrupt from outside. It belongs to the composition. That distinction matters. It tells us that this is not a story of love invaded by accident, it is a meditation on love as something that already contains tension, risk, and the possibility of injury. Such a vision could only emerge fully in a world prepared to look inward without innocence. And perhaps that is why the painting still speaks with such clarity. The early 20th century may be gone, but the consciousness it helped form remains familiar to us. We too inhabit a world that distrusts simple surfaces, that knows how easily desire entangles itself with fear, that suspects every promise of permanence. We too are haunted by the sense that what we cherish most can wound us most deeply. In this way, The Lovers belongs not just to its historical moment but to the long modern condition. So when we stand before the painting, we are not simply returning to a past era. We are entering a chamber of feeling that history made visible but did not exhaust. The world that produced this image was one in which myth had not vanished, but psychology had stepped forward, in which beauty remained essential, but innocence had thinned, in which art still sought the eternal, but now did so through the fractures of the intimate self. Out of that world came this embrace, this darkness, this blade between bodies, this unforgettable sense that love, once deeply known, is never only sweetness. It is also ordeal, and revelation, and a quiet encounter with the tragic knowledge of being alive. Chapter 3: The Artist's State of Mind. When we try to imagine the state of mind from which the lovers arose, we must proceed with humility. No painting yields the full privacy of its maker, and no artist can be reduced to a single work. Yet some images feel so inwardly charged that they seem to preserve, within their form, a certain climate of consciousness. Gallen-Kallella's The Lovers is one of those works. It carries the gravity of someone who had looked not only at the outer life of art, history, and nation, but also at the vulnerable interior of feeling. The painting suggests an artist who had moved beyond public themes into a more intimate reckoning with contradiction, and who understood that the deepest human dramas do not always arrive with heroic scale. Sometimes they appear in silence, in touch, in hesitation, in the impossible closeness between love and harm. Gallen-Kallela was not a minor or uncertain figure searching for a subject. He was already an artist of consequence, a painter associated with some of the most resonant visual expressions of Finnish cultural identity, and most famously with imagery connected to the Kalevala. That matters because it gives the lovers a special kind of weight. When an artist known for epic material turns toward private emotional terrain, the shift often reveals not a change in skill but a change in necessity. Something in the inner life begins to demand form. The painting feels like the work of someone who no longer wished only to narrate collective imagination, but to descend into the unresolved chamber of personal truth. There is, in the painting, a remarkable lack of vanity. It does not flaunt mastery, though mastery is present. It does not seek to dazzle with virtuosity for its own sake. Instead, it seems almost sober in its commitment to emotional honesty. This is the mark of a mature sensibility. A younger or more decorative imagination might have made the lovers beautiful in a way that reassures us, or symbolic in a way that feels clever. Gallen-Kallela does something harder. He allows the image to remain tense, unresolved, even slightly wounded. He does not protect the viewer from discomfort, and in doing so, he suggests that he himself was willing to remain inside uncomfortable knowledge. One can sense, too, a painter who understood that love is not only a subject but a test of vision. To paint lovers is easy if one wishes merely to idealize. It becomes much harder if one wants to reveal the unstable structure beneath romantic appearances. The sword between the bodies is not the gesture of someone interested in conventional sentiment. It is the gesture of a mind alert to duality, perhaps even haunted by it. The image proposes that intimacy is always at risk of becoming tragic, not because love is false, but because love is real enough to expose everything fragile in the human being. Such a vision suggests psychological seriousness, perhaps born from experience, perhaps from reflection, most likely from both. Artists often return to certain emotional shapes because those shapes mirror their own meditation on existence. In The Lovers, Gallen-Kallela seems drawn not to harmony completed, but to tension sustained. The embrace does not dissolve the sword. The sword does not cancel the embrace. What interests him is the fact that both remain true at once. This kind of compositional thinking belongs to an artist who distrusts simplification. He seems to know that any honest image of adult love must include not just ecstasy, but vulnerability, not just union, but exposure, not just desire, but the awareness of consequence. There is also a certain inward fatigue in the painting, though not a defeated one. It feels made by someone who no longer believes that feeling can be kept pure by distance. Mythic worlds often permit symbolic clarity, heroes act, fate unfolds, forces are named. But in intimate life, things are more difficult. Motives blur. Pleasure and fear mingle. Desire can contain tenderness, possession, sacrifice, and destruction at once. To take such complexity as one subject is to accept that the painting may never settle into one meaning. Gallen-Kallela seems willing to accept that. Indeed, he seems to trust ambiguity as part of the truth. Perhaps this is what makes the work feel so human. It is not diagnosing love from the outside. It is inhabiting it from within. The figures are not specimens of symbolism arranged for interpretation. They feel as though they have emerged from a lived intuition, that human beings can cling to one another even while carrying the instruments of each other's sorrow. The sword might be read as fate, or conflict, or the knowledge of mortality, or the violence implicit in desire itself. But what matters is that the artist did not choose to hide that meaning behind ornament. He placed it at the center. That is an act of moral and emotional courage. It is tempting to imagine the painter here as solitary, reflective, perhaps aware that the grandeur of public themes could not exhaust the truth of being alive. The shift toward more personal and psychological material suggests not a rejection of his earlier concerns, but a deepening. National identity, legend, and cultural memory remained important, but perhaps they could not answer certain quieter questions. What is love when stripped of poetry's flattery? What does union look like when seen through the lens of impermanence? What if the greatest dangers in life are not only those on battlefields or in epics, but those that enter the human heart through attachment? The dark palette and heavy structure of the composition reinforce this psychological impression. Nothing is airy, accidental, or naive. The work feels held together by deliberation, by an artist who wanted the image to carry emotional pressure without collapse. There is discipline in that. To evoke tragedy without melodrama requires control. To make symbolism feel inevitable rather than imposed requires tact. Gallen-Kallela appears here not only as a visionary but as a careful constructor of feeling, someone who knew how much to reveal and how much to leave unspoken. And what remains unspoken may tell us as much as what is shown. The painting offers no explicit narrative, no secure interpretation, no final emotional instruction. This openness suggests that the artist respected the mystery of the subject. He did not come to declare what love is, once and for all. He came to show what it feels like when love becomes inseparable from danger, and when the soul can no longer pretend otherwise. That is not cynicism. It is a form of mature tenderness. Only someone who takes love seriously would refuse to sentimentalize it. In the end, the state of mind behind the lovers feels both personal and philosophical. It belongs to an artist who had moved through the outer world of cultural significance and arrived, perhaps inevitably, at the inward fact that all human meaning must pass through private vulnerability. The painting does not read like confession, but it does feel like knowledge. The kind of knowledge that is difficult to say aloud, because once spoken plainly it can sound too severe, that love is not ruined by danger, but revealed by it, that intimacy does not spare us from pain, but places pain in its most meaningful context, that the embrace and the blade are not opposites in some distant symbolic system, but neighbors within the same human truth. Gallen-Kallela seems to have understood this, and in understanding it, he gave us a painting that feels less like an opinion than an earned and quiet recognition. Chapter 4: The Presence Within the Painting. If we let the painting deepen in our imagination, the lovers begin to change. They are no longer merely figures arranged in a composition. They become presences, almost characters, suspended in a moment that seems both deeply private and strangely timeless. We do not know their names, and perhaps that anonymity is essential. It frees them from anecdote and allows them to enter the larger drama of human meaning. They are two people, certainly, but they are also two conditions of the soul. Each seems to carry tenderness and peril at once. Each seems to stand on the threshold between surrender and loss. There is something almost theatrical in the stillness of their embrace, but it is not the stillness of a staged romance. It is the stillness that comes when a feeling has become too large for movement. They seem drawn together by necessity, as though the body has reached a point where language no longer serves. One imagines them in the kind of silence that does not feel empty, but unbearably full. Their closeness is not casual. It has the pressure of fate, the density of something longed for and feared in equal measure. They are near because distance can no longer be sustained. Yet what they have approached is not peace. It is truth. The sword between them alters the emotional temperature of their presence. Without it, we might read them as tragic only in the abstract sense, as lovers subject to time like all lovers. But with the sword there, everything intensifies. The embrace becomes a negotiation with danger. The nearness becomes costly. The image suggests that these two figures are bound by something that cannot remain innocent. Perhaps they know it. Perhaps that knowledge is what gives their stillness its strange solemnity. They are not simply lovers enjoying closeness, they are lovers who have already crossed into awareness. Something in them understands that desire is not the opposite of risk, but one of its forms. And so the painting invites us to imagine an inner life for them. What do they feel in this moment? Is it comfort, desperation, memory, farewell, longing, guilt, surrender? The extraordinary power of the work lies in the fact that it does not decide for us. The figures are emotionally legible but not narratively fixed. That ambiguity is what makes them feel alive. Real people are never only one thing in their decisive moments. They cling and hesitate, love and fear, hope and grieve all at once. The lovers in Gallen-Kallella's painting possess exactly that layered presence. They are emotionally dense. The more one looks, the less reducible they become. There is also a strong sense that they're enclosed within their own world, and that we, as viewers, approach them almost as intruders. This privacy matters. It gives the painting a moral dignity. The figures are not displayed for our consumption in the ordinary way. They do not perform intimacy, they inhabit it. Their embrace remains partially inaccessible, which is perhaps why it feels more profound. We are close enough to witness, but not close enough to resolve. That distance preserves the mystery of what passes between two people at the threshold of emotional extremity. In many artworks, figures serve the composition. Here, the composition seems to serve the condition of the figures. Everything is arranged to intensify their psychological field. The dark atmosphere presses inward. The lines gather weight around the bodies. The sword creates a center of tension that neither figure can escape. Even the intimacy itself feels sculpted by pressure. One gets the impression that these lovers are not being described from outside, but revealed from the interior. We are not seeing how they look to the world. We are seeing how their bond feels from within its own private seriousness. The presence of the two bodies also raises an older question that art never stops asking: what happens when two selves try to meet fully? Human beings long for union, yet each person remains irreducibly separate, carrying memories, wounds, instincts, and limits no embrace can completely erase. The lovers seem caught inside that paradox. Their closeness is intense, perhaps even absolute in emotional intention, but the sword reminds us that something remains unsolved. There is still division, still vulnerability, still the possibility that what joins them may also expose them to the deepest forms of suffering. In this way, they become more than lovers. They become embodiments of the human wish to overcome separateness, and of the tragic knowledge that such overcoming is never total. It is possible, too, to feel in them a kind of archetypal force. They are not simply one couple in one place. They resemble all those pairs in literature, myth, memory, and life who discover that love is not a sheltered meadow but a difficult passage. They belong to the lineage of those who are transformed by attachment and undone by it, those who seek refuge in another person only to discover that love cannot abolish mortality, conflict, or fate. Yet Gallen-Kallela does not cast them as grand mythic figures. He keeps them human. Their tragedy, if tragedy it is, feels intimate rather than operatic. That restraint makes their presence more haunting. The longer we imagine them, the more we sense that they exist in a suspended now, one of those moments that seem to contain before and after within themselves. Perhaps they have only just come together after estrangement. Perhaps they are clinging because separation is imminent. Perhaps the sword symbolizes a history of pain already shared. Perhaps it points toward an ending already known. All such possibilities hover around the image, but none closes it. The painting remains faithful to the complexity of real emotional life, where decisive moments are often crowded with incompatible feelings and unfinished meanings. And perhaps that is why these figures endure. They do not survive in memory because they are beautiful in any easy sense. They survive because they feel inhabited. Their silence is not emptiness but presence. Their embrace is not merely pictorial but existential. They seem to ask no questions of us, and yet they awaken many. What does it mean to hold someone close when danger has already entered the bond? What remains of love when innocence has fallen away? Can tenderness exist without illusion? Can desire survive knowledge? The painting never answers. Instead, it allows the lovers to remain what they are, two human beings suspended in the charged stillness where attachment becomes destiny, and where the heart, having come nearest to what it longs for, also discovers how exposed it has always been. Chapter 5 are symbols that speak without words. Some paintings tell their deepest truths not through action, but through arrangement. They place a few charged elements in relation to one another and allow the viewer's mind to feel the pressure between them. The Lovers is built in precisely this way. Its meaning does not depend on a story we can summarize. It emerges instead through symbols that seem to breathe quietly inside the image, each one carrying emotional and philosophical weight. The painting does not speak aloud, but it is never silent. It communicates through darkness, posture, proximity, tension, and the terrible eloquence of an object placed where it should not be. The most obvious symbol, of course, is the sword. Yet obvious does not mean exhausted. The more one considers it, the more meanings it seems capable of holding. A sword can suggest violence, but also judgment, honor, division, sacrifice, fate. It can protect, wound, defend, sever, consecrate, or destroy. In the setting of lovers, its ambiguity becomes even more powerful. It may represent the danger already hidden within desire. It may symbolize the knowledge that every profound attachment gives time and mortality a sharper edge. It may stand for betrayal, or for the invisible force that cuts through every attempt at perfect union. Most hauntingly, it may suggest that love itself contains a blade, that the more deeply we attach, the more precisely we can be wounded. Where the sword is placed matters as much as what it is. It lies between bodies. That placement transforms it from a mere attribute into a structural truth. It is not off to the side, not waiting outside the scene, not arriving from some external enemy. It inhabits the bond itself. This is why the painting feels so unsettling. Gallen-Kallela seems to say that the threats most decisive in human love are not always separate from love, sometimes they are intertwined with it. Fear lives in intimacy. Dependency lives in desire. The possibility of loss begins at the very moment of attachment. The sword, then, is not an interruption but a revelation. The embrace itself is another symbol, though at first it appears simply natural. Two lovers holding one another is one of the oldest gestures in art, yet here the gesture is stripped of reassurance. Instead of promising safety, it seems to intensify vulnerability. Arms that would normally signify comfort now appear almost like acts of necessity, as if the figures are holding on not because all is well, but because something fragile is at stake. Their closeness becomes symbolic of the human longing to overcome aloneness, while the tension in the image reminds us that such longing can never fully cancel existential separation. In this sense, the embrace symbolizes both fulfillment and impossibility. Color, too, speaks with enormous force. The dark tones of the painting are not incidental. Darkness in art can mean many things: secrecy, depth, grief, night, inwardness, sacredness, or danger. Here it seems to gather several of those meanings at once. The darkness surrounding the lovers feels less like background than atmosphere, a visible form of emotional pressure. It isolates the figures from any worldly setting that might dilute the symbolic intensity. There is no garden, no horizon, no social context to soften the moment. Instead, darkness encloses them, turning the painting into a chamber of feeling. It suggests that what we are seeing belongs to the inner night of human experience, where love is stripped of distraction and confronted in its raw seriousness. The heavy lines mentioned in descriptions of the work also matter. A heavy line is not just a stylistic trait, it changes how emotion is carried. Light, fluid contours can make a figure seem fleeting, elegant, or dreamlike. Heavy lines give form weight. They insist on substance. In the lovers, those heavier structures seem to emphasize burden, gravity, and inevitability. The figures do not float. They are held down by feeling, by consciousness, by the accumulated density of what their union means. Symbolically, the line becomes moral as well as visual. It tells us this is not a passing flirtation. This is attachment under the sign of consequence. Even the lack of explanatory detail functions symbolically. We are not given dimensions known with certainty, nor a clear narrative, nor a public setting, nor any obvious anecdotal key. The painting withholds the ordinary anchors that would make it easier to place and therefore easier to domesticate. This withholding creates universality. The lovers become not less real but more archetypal. Their anonymity allows them to symbolize conditions rather than biographies. They stand for a fundamental human pattern, the meeting of desire and danger, tenderness and mortality, beauty and contradiction. The symbolic richness of the work also lies in the contrast between intimacy and threat. Contrast is among the oldest tools of meaning in art. Yet here the contrast is not decorative or rhetorical. It is ontological. The painting does not merely place opposites side by side, it reveals that they belong together. Love is beautiful, and love is dangerous. Union consoles and union exposes. Passion heals and passion wounds. Symbolism in its deepest form does not invent meaning artificially. It reveals hidden structures already present in existence. Gallen-Kallela seems to understand that. The symbols in this painting feel true because they arise from emotional realities we recognize, even when we would prefer not to name them. There may also be a symbolic movement from myth to interiority in the work itself. Knowing that the artist is so strongly associated with the epic world of the Kalevala, one feels the quiet significance of this painting's smaller scale of drama. The heroic sword has entered the intimate scene. The object of legend is now embedded in the private realm. In symbolic terms, this is extraordinary. It suggests that the great conflicts once staged in national or mythical narratives also exist in the human heart. Heroism does not disappear, it changes form. To endure love honestly may require a courage as grave as any celebrated in epic song. And then there is the expression of the whole image, something beyond any single symbol. Some paintings produce meaning through accumulation, but others produce it through atmosphere. The Lovers belongs to both kinds. Its symbols are strong, yet none of them can be fully separated from the mood they create together. That mood is one of nocturnal intensity, of beauty touched by sorrow, of desire slowed by knowledge. The painting does not shout its symbols. It allows them to gather, like thoughts in the mind just before sleep, when emotion becomes more honest and language less defensive. This is perhaps why the work feels so enduring. Symbols that are too fixed become stale. Symbols that remain open continue to live. The sword in the Lovers is not exhausted by one interpretation, nor is the darkness, nor the embrace. Each remains alive because each is anchored in a truth larger than doctrine, that human beings seek closeness while carrying within themselves the conditions of fracture, that love is not pure innocence but a profound exposure, that the most beautiful bonds are often beautiful precisely because they are fragile. Gallen-Kallela lets these truths speak without proclamation. He trusts image over argument. He trusts the viewer's silence. And in that silence, the symbols continue their work, entering the mind slowly, like something remembered rather than learned. Chapter 6: Other Visions of the Same Idea. No painting exists entirely alone. Even the most singular work stands somewhere within a long conversation that art has carried across centuries, a conversation about beauty, longing, death, memory, devotion, separation, and the strange difficulty of being human. The Lovers enters one of the oldest branches of that conversation, the branch concerned with love and its cost. To see Gallen-Kallella's painting more fully, it helps to place it beside other visions of the same underlying idea, not because it imitates them, but because it answers, in its own dark and intimate way, a question artists have asked again and again. What does love look like when stripped of innocence? What image can carry both tenderness and ruin? Many traditions in Western art offered radiant versions of lovers. Their union was framed by pastoral calm, noble beauty, or an almost sacred harmony. In such works, love often appears as a temporary victory over the harshness of the world. The Lovers stand apart from history, sheltered by idealization. Their bodies are luminous, their gestures composed, their surroundings supportive. Even when desire is intense, it remains legible, beautiful, and often redeemed by form. These images satisfy something deep in human longing, the wish that love might create a realm outside suffering. Yet Gallen-Kallella's The Lovers gently resists that inheritance. He does not place his figures in safety. He does not let beauty erase danger. He asks instead what happens when union remains meaningful but ceases to be protective. There are also many tragic lovers in art and literature, of course, lovers whose stories end in separation, violence, or death. But often the tragedy comes through narrative. We know the sequence of events, the social obstacles, the fatal decisions. The power lies in what happens. Gallen-Kallella's difference is striking. He compresses tragedy into a symbolic instant. There is no dramatic unfolding for us to follow. The entire philosophy of doomed intimacy is condensed into an embrace and a blade. This gives the work a special intensity. It does not ask us to witness a story of destruction. It asks us to feel destruction already latent within love's own form. One might think of other symbolist works in which desire appears shadowed by mystery, where beauty is inseparable from melancholy, and where the visible world becomes a vehicle for inner disturbance. In those works, figures often seem to exist on the threshold between flesh and dream, between earthly emotion and metaphysical symbolism. Gallen-Kallela shares that impulse, but his treatment is less ornamental, less seduced by pure atmosphere. His symbolism remains rooted in moral and emotional reality. The painting is dreamlike only in the sense that dreams sometimes tell the truth more directly than waking speech. It does not float away from life. It returns us to life at its most exposed. There are also echoes here of the long cultural fascination with love as a wound. Poets, dramatists, and painters have often imagined desire as something piercing, consuming, or fatal. Lovers are struck, undone, afflicted, transformed. Yet in many of those representations, the wound comes from without, an arrow, a curse, a hostile world, a jealous rival, a decree of fate. In the lovers, the wound is not externalized so neatly. The sword lies within the space of intimacy itself. That is a profound revision of an old theme. It suggests that the deepest danger of love is not only what attacks it from the outside, but what its own depth awakens from within, the fear of loss, the surrender of control, the dependence that can become anguish. It is also possible to see the painting as a counterpoint to more heroic uses of the sword in art. Traditionally, the sword belongs to warriors, saints, rulers, avengers, martyrs. It symbolizes struggle in the public realm, where action is visible and conflict has a recognizable stage. Gallen-Kallela relocates that symbol to the private realm. The battlefield becomes the embrace. The heroism, if there is heroism, belongs not to conquest but to emotional endurance. This shift feels especially significant coming from an artist with a strong relation to epic and national themes. It is as though he were saying that the great drama is not only out there in legend and history, but also here, between two people, where the stakes are invisible yet absolute. When we think of other artists who explored love in darker tones, we often find either sensuality heightened to decadence or sorrow rendered in overtly theatrical form. Gallen-Kallela avoids both extremes. His painting is not indulgent in its darkness, and it is not melodramatic in its grief. Instead, it is grave. That gravity gives it a philosophical dignity. It belongs less to spectacle than to contemplation. The viewer is not shocked into reaction but drawn into meditation. This, too, distinguishes it from many neighboring visions of passion. It does not ask for excitement. It asks for inwardness. There is another comparison worth making, not to any single artwork but to a recurrent human fantasy, that love will save us from complexity. Much of romantic culture has depended on this promise in one form or another. The beloved appears as refuge, redemption, completion, or healing presence. Gallen-Kallela does not entirely reject that vision. The embrace in the lovers still carries real intensity, real pull, real human need. But he complicates it beyond comfort. The beloved may indeed feel like sanctuary, the painting suggests, but sanctuary does not abolish danger. Love may be one of the most meaningful experiences available to human beings, and still it cannot remove the sword from existence. It can only place us nearer to it. In this sense, The Lovers belongs to a rarer lineage, works that understand intimacy not as escape from the tragic dimension of life, but as one of the places where that dimension becomes most fully visible. Such works tend to endure because they do not flatter our defenses. They know that mature love involves the recognition of another person's fragility and our own. They understand that closeness is always shadowed by the possibility of separation, and that this shadow is not a defect in love but one of the conditions that makes love precious. This is why Gallen-Kallella's painting feels both familiar and singular. Familiar, because it speaks to a theme artists have returned to for generations. Singular, because of the economy and severity with which it does so. Others have painted lovers in ecstasy, lovers in grief, lovers in legend, lovers in death. Gallen-Kallela paints lovers at the exact point where tenderness and danger become indistinguishable. That is his contribution to the long conversation. He gives us not romance fulfilled, not tragedy narrated, but contradiction embodied. And perhaps that is the most haunting vision of all. For it is one thing to imagine love ruined after the fact, once betrayal, time, or death has arrived. It is another thing entirely to see that the possibility of ruin may be present from the beginning, not as a flaw but as part of love's own seriousness. Other artworks circle this truth from different angles. The Lovers holds it still and lets us feel its weight. In doing so, it stands among those rare images that do not merely depict emotion, but think through it, quietly, beautifully, and without mercy. Chapter 7: What it reveals about human nature. There are paintings that tell us something about a historical moment, something about a style, something about an artist's vision. And then there are paintings that, almost despite themselves, tell us something more difficult, what human beings are like when no social performance is left, when the polished language of civility falls away, and when the inner structure of desire is briefly exposed. The Lovers belongs to that more difficult category. Its subject may seem narrow at first, two figures, one embrace, one symbolic interruption, but its reach is wider. It reveals something about human nature that most of us sense long before we can articulate it. We are creatures who long for closeness and fear what closeness will do to us. We desire what may transform us, and what transforms us may also wound us. At the center of human nature lies a paradox that no civilization has solved. We are separate beings who cannot bear complete separateness. We seek others because solitude, however necessary, eventually reveals its limits. To be human is to hunger for recognition, warmth, witness, and shared vulnerability. Yet the very act of attaching ourselves to another makes us fragile in new ways. Before love, many dangers remain abstract. After love, they become personal. Time becomes sharper. Absence becomes heavier. Mortality becomes less philosophical and more unbearable. The sword in Gallen-Kallella's painting may be read, then, as the symbol of what attachment awakens, the knowledge that the heart has entered a region where it can no longer protect itself through distance. This is not simply a truth about romance. It is a truth about all profound bonds. But romantic love reveals it with special intensity because desire often arrives with a powerful fantasy of completion. We imagine, consciously or not, that closeness might relieve the ache of incompleteness, that union might quiet our existential unrest. And for a time, perhaps, it can. Yet human nature is not made for permanent innocence. Sooner or later, fear enters. Not because love was false, but because love mattered enough to make loss imaginable. The painting understands this without cynicism. It does not sneer at longing. It shows longing as one of the noblest and most dangerous things we do. There is also something in the painting about the human tendency to confuse beauty with safety. We see what is beautiful and want to believe it will not harm us. We feel tenderness and assume it cancels violence. But life is more contradictory than that. Some of our deepest wounds come not from what is ugly or obviously hostile, but from what we have cherished most. Human nature clings to hope, and rightly so, but hope can become defenseless when it refuses complexity. The Lovers gently corrects that refusal. It suggests that maturity does not mean loving less. It means loving without pretending that danger can be banished from the human condition. The work also touches something essential about desire itself. Desire is often spoken of as appetite, fire, movement toward fulfillment. But desire also contains blindness. It narrows the world. It concentrates value. It can make one person feel luminous beyond measure, and in doing so it can alter judgment, rearrange priorities, and expose old wounds. This does not make desire contemptible. It makes it powerful. The painting seems aware that passion is not merely sweet intensity. It is also destabilization. The Lovers are drawn together, yet the sword reminds us that what draws us most powerfully may also place us most at risk of confusion, sacrifice, and inner conflict. Fear is present here as well, though quietly. Not the fear of immediate attack, but the deeper fear that accompanies any serious emotional investment. What if the beloved leaves? What if love changes? What if closeness becomes possession, or dependence, or grief? What if what heals us also has the power to undo us? Human nature is rarely transparent about such fears. We often hide them behind declarations of certainty, behind idealization, behind the performance of confidence. Gallen-Kallela strips away those defenses. He gives fear symbolic form without turning it into spectacle. The result is more unsettling than open drama because it feels so familiar. And then there is ego, that subtle force that enters even our most tender experiences. Love is often imagined as the overcoming of ego, the surrender of selfishness to devotion. Sometimes it is. But ego can also conceal itself inside love, shaping expectation, possessiveness, jealousy, and the wish to secure another person as an answer to one's own unrest. The sword between the lovers may hint at this darker edge, the way desire can become entangled with ownership, the way attachment can carry an impulse not only to merge but to dominate, to hold, to prevent loss by force of will. Human nature is not pure, even in its sincerity. That is one reason why love can become so painful. We do not come to it empty. We come with wounds, fears, needs, and unexamined hungers. Yet the painting is not merely exposing weakness. It is also showing the dignity of human vulnerability. To be vulnerable is not simply to be breakable. It is to be capable of deep relation. The very qualities that make loss possible also make meaning possible. A human being who could not be wounded by love would also be incapable of its full depth. This is one of the hardest truths to accept, and perhaps one of the painting's greatest insights. The sword does not only symbolize threat. It symbolizes the price of significance. What matters can hurt us because it matters. That is not an accident. It is the structure of a life in which meaning and fragility are inseparable. Another truth about human nature emerges in the painting's refusal of resolution. We hunger not only for love but for explanation. We want to know what things mean, why pain enters, who is guilty, whether redemption is possible. But much of human life resists neat interpretation. Why does one bond nourish while another destroys? Why does desire bring clarity to some people and blindness to others? Why do tenderness and cruelty sometimes inhabit the same emotional world? The Lovers does not answer. In doing so, it reveals something central about being human. We live many of our most decisive experiences without final understanding. We act, attach, suffer, hope, and remember in conditions of ambiguity. Perhaps this is why the painting feels less like an allegory than like an exposure. It is not teaching a lesson from above. It is showing us to ourselves. The lovers, however private they seem, become mirrors for a condition we recognize. We have all known, in some form, the longing to trust completely and the fear that such trust opens an irretrievable wound. We have all, in one way or another, tried to hold beauty close while sensing its impermanence. We have all discovered that human beings are capable of tenderness vast enough to transform a life and contradiction deep enough to darken it. In the end, what the Lovers reveals about human nature is neither flattering nor despairing. It is simply serious. It tells us that love is not an escape from the tragic structure of existence, but one of the places where that structure becomes most visible. It tells us that desire is noble and dangerous, that fear accompanies attachment not as a defect but as its shadow, that ego and vulnerability coexist in the same heart, and that the search for intimacy is among the most meaningful risks we take. The painting offers no cure for these truths. It does something more enduring. It allows us to see them without disguise, and in seeing them, perhaps to feel less alone in the difficult grandeur of being human. Chapter 8: Why it still speaks today. One of the quiet mysteries of art is that some works remain alive even when the world that produced them has changed almost beyond recognition. Languages shift, customs disappear, empires fade, technologies transform daily life, and yet an old image continues to speak with unnerving freshness. The Lovers is such a work. Nothing about our time resembles the early 20th century exactly, and yet the painting's emotional structure feels uncannily current. Perhaps that is because the outer world has modernized far faster than the inner one. Human beings still long, still fear, still idealize, still wound each other, still seek refuge in love, and still discover that refuge is never free of risk. In the modern world, intimacy is often surrounded by noise. We live amid constant display, endless commentary, and the pressure to explain ourselves in public. Relationships are named, performed, interpreted, and measured in ways earlier eras could scarcely imagine. Yet despite this abundance of language, or perhaps because of it, many people feel less capable of inhabiting the depth of emotion than of discussing it. We narrate love before we feel it fully. We document closeness rather than surrender to it. We become fluent in the visible signs of attachment while remaining uncertain about its deeper costs. In that context, The Lovers feels almost radical in its silence. It offers no slogans, no certainty, no easy grammar of romance. It returns us to the stripped and ancient fact of two people facing the serious consequences of closeness. The painting also speaks to a contemporary fear that often goes unnamed, the fear of needing another person too much. Modern life prizes autonomy, self-possession, emotional independence. We are told, directly or indirectly, to remain whole within ourselves, to avoid entanglement, to manage attachment as though vulnerability were a technical problem. And yet this ideal, however useful in part, runs against something elemental in human nature. We do need one another. We are changed by care, by touch, by witness, by love. The difficulty is that dependence has become suspect, and so many people try to approach intimacy while holding back the very openness it requires. Gallen-Kallella's painting understands the cost of attachment, but it does not retreat from attachment itself. It acknowledges danger without pretending that self-protection is enough. There is another reason the painting remains modern: it understands contradiction. Ours is an age deeply aware of complexity, even if it often struggles to bear it. We know that love can coexist with fear, that tenderness can exist alongside injury, that the people who comfort us may also disappoint us, that the bonds we value most may become the site of our deepest uncertainty. In that sense, The Lovers is not foreign to modern consciousness at all. It articulates what many contemporary people feel but rarely see rendered with such dignity. It says, without accusation, that emotional life is rarely pure. The very forces that sustain us can unsettle us. The embrace and the blade belong to the same world. The work also resonates in an era haunted by fragility. Our time is saturated with awareness of instability, personal, social, emotional, ecological, historical. Even when life appears outwardly secure, many people feel how quickly circumstances can shift. This awareness changes how we love. Closeness becomes more precious, but also more frightening. The beloved is not only cherished but silently understood as vulnerable to time, change, and absence. The Lovers captures precisely that condition. It is an image of intimacy under the sign of impermanence. That is why it feels contemporary. It knows what it means to hold someone close while already feeling the shadow around them. And yet the painting speaks not only through its darkness, but through its refusal of despair. This is important. The Lovers are still embracing. The presence of danger has not dissolved their connection. The sword is there, but so is the human impulse to draw near anyway. That, too, is profoundly modern, or perhaps simply timeless. We continue to love under uncertain conditions. We continue to build meaning in a world that offers no guarantees. We continue to choose attachment even when we know what attachment can cost. The painting understands that such choice is not foolishness. It is one of the clearest expressions of human courage. For contemporary viewers, the work can also feel like an antidote to simplification. Much of modern discourse prefers categories that are clean, decisive, and immediately usable. But emotional truth seldom arrives that way. Real love is often contradictory, layered with old memory, fear of repetition, hope for healing, and the wish to trust again. Gallen-Kallela does not flatten any of this. He gives us an image spacious enough to contain conflicting feelings. That spaciousness is one reason the painting remains powerful. It does not demand that we pick one interpretation and discard the rest. It honors the complexity with which actual people live. There is, too, something deeply relevant in the painting's movement away from heroic narratives toward interior life. Modern people often feel caught between large public pressures and private emotional realities. We are surrounded by collective events, social identities, historical accelerations, and constant information, yet our most decisive suffering often remains intimate and invisible. The lovers understands that the private realm is not small. It is where meaning is tested most deeply. It reminds us that the inner life deserves seriousness, and that the emotional drama between two people can carry a gravity equal to any public story. Perhaps this is why the painting lingers so strongly in an age of speed. It slows us down. It requires contemplation rather than reaction. It does not entertain our impatience. Instead, it asks us to sit with ambivalence, to look at tenderness without idealizing it, to think of love without sentimental anesthesia. That demand is rare now, and therefore precious. The painting becomes not only an object from the past but a discipline for the present, teaching us again how to stay with what is emotionally real even when it is unresolved. And in the end, that may be the deepest reason it still speaks today. We have not outgrown the truths it contains. We still fall in love and discover our own fragility. We still hope for sanctuary and find complexity instead. We still confuse beauty with certainty and still learn that certainty was never the gift love promised. What it promised, if it promises anything, is significance, the chance to be altered by another life. Gallen-Kallela's The Lovers understands this with grave tenderness. It tells modern viewers what earlier viewers also needed to hear, though not in words, that to love seriously is to live without guarantees, and yet to choose closeness anyway. That truth does not age. It only becomes more recognizable. Chapter 9: The Uncomfortable Realization. There is a point, in looking at a painting like The Lovers, when appreciation gives way to recognition, and recognition gives way to discomfort. At first we admire the composition, the symbolism, the gravity of the mood. Then, slowly, the work begins to turn inward on us. We realize that it is not only describing two figures in an old painting. It is exposing a truth we may spend much of our lives trying to soften. The uncomfortable realization is not merely that love can lead to pain. Most adults know that already. The deeper realization is more severe: love derives much of its depth from the very fact that it can wound us irreparably. The risk is not accidental to the experience. It is part of what gives the experience its emotional magnitude. This is difficult to accept because it violates one of our most persistent hopes. We want to believe that the highest forms of intimacy will protect us from the harshest structures of existence. We want love to be a shield against loneliness, loss, randomness, and death. Sometimes, in moments of grace, it can feel that way. Yet Gallen-Kallela's painting suggests something sterner. Love does not abolish these realities. It personalizes them. Before attachment, mortality is abstract. After attachment, mortality has a face. Before love, absence is an idea. After love, absence becomes a room that cannot be entered without pain. The sword between the lovers is the emblem of that transformation. It tells us that intimacy does not remove vulnerability. It sharpens it. There is another uncomfortable truth here as well, that human beings are often drawn most deeply to what unsettles them. We do not always seek peace. Sometimes we seek intensity, recognition, the feeling of being seen in some essential and destabilizing way. Passion can feel like revelation precisely because it dislodges the self from its routines of control. But what reveals us also weakens our defenses. The painting seems to understand that many forms of love are compelling not because they are safe, but because they are profound enough to reach the hidden chambers of the person. We do not merely want comfort. We want significance, even when significance arrives with danger. This leads to one of the darkest recognitions the painting offers, that the beloved may become the site where our oldest wounds gather. Love can heal, yes, but it can also awaken what has long remained dormant: fear of abandonment, fear of inadequacy, fear of being possessed, fear of vanishing into another's need, fear of loss so total that life itself seems altered afterward. The lovers in the painting do not display these anxieties explicitly, but the symbolic structure suggests them. Their closeness is too serious to be innocent. Something has already entered the bond: memory, fate, conflict, mortality, or all of them together. We are made to feel that love is never only about the present moment. It also gathers everything each person carries into it. Then comes the most difficult realization of all. Perhaps the sword is not only in the painting. Perhaps it is in us. Perhaps the forces that threaten love are not merely external events or tragic circumstances, but qualities woven into the human condition itself. Our fear, our possessiveness, our longing for certainty, our inability to control time, our hunger to be completed, our difficulty in accepting the separateness of the other, these may be part of the blade. We bring them with us into every deep bond. That does not mean love is doomed. But it does mean love is never untouched by the unfinished, contradictory nature of the people who enter it. This is where the painting becomes almost philosophical in the most intimate way. It suggests that the tragedy of love is not simply that it ends. The tragedy is that even at its most beautiful, it cannot fully escape the conditions of finitude. No embrace can make two souls into one without remainder. No devotion can stop time. No passion can guarantee mutual clarity forever. No tenderness can secure itself against all change. The lovers can hold each other, but they cannot master the world, or history, or fate, or even the hidden depths of their own hearts. The sword stands as witness to that limit. And yet the painting does not collapse into nihilism. The uncomfortable realization is painful because it is bound to something precious. If love were trivial, its risks would not matter. If attachment were shallow, loss would not terrify us. The very severity of the truth reveals the value of the thing at stake. This is why the painting feels tragic but not empty. It understands that what wounds us most deeply does so because it has entered the center of meaning. To be hurt by love is not merely to be unfortunate. It is to have lived in relation to something that mattered enough to alter the shape of the self. There is, perhaps, also a moral discomfort in the painting. It asks us whether we have been honest about what we seek from others. Do we love them, or do we ask them to rescue us from ourselves? Do we welcome their freedom, or do we secretly wish to secure them against change? Do we accept the fragility of love, or do we demand from it a permanence no human condition can provide? The sword may be the symbol of all the ways love suffers under the pressure of impossible expectation. We wound what we cling to when we refuse its mortal, contingent nature. The painting says this without accusation, which makes it harder to evade. At a deeper level still, the work confronts us with the fact that consciousness itself changes love. Animals may bond, desire, protect, and remain close, but human beings also know. We know that what we love can be lost. We know that every shared moment passes. We know that bodies fail, memories fade, promises strain, time cuts through every shelter. This knowledge can make us defensive, ironic, withdrawn. But it can also make tenderness more profound. The lovers in the painting seem to stand inside exactly that knowledge. Their embrace is meaningful because it takes place under the sign of fragility, not outside it. And so the uncomfortable realization is finally this: the shadow within love is not evidence against love. It is part of its truth. The sword does not cancel the embrace. The embrace does not remove the sword. We are left with both. That is what unsettles us, and that is what the painting refuses to simplify. It leaves us in the difficult dignity of a world where beauty and threat, tenderness and sorrow, union and limit, exist together. Perhaps that is the most adult vision of love art can offer, not the promise that pain can be avoided, but the recognition that meaning survives only where vulnerability is allowed. And in that recognition, uncomfortable though it is, something in us becomes quieter, sadder, and perhaps more honest. Chapter 10: What the Painting Never Explains. In the end, the greatest paintings do not close around their meanings. They remain open, not because they are vague, but because they are faithful to realities that cannot be exhausted by explanation. The Lovers belongs to that rare company. It gives us an embrace, a darkness, a sword, and an atmosphere of intimate gravity, but it withholds the final key. It never tells us exactly what happened. It never tells us who is at fault, whether this is the beginning of a tragedy or its aftermath, whether the sword threatens, separates, symbolizes, or remembers. It never tells us whether the lovers are clinging in comfort, in fear, in guilt, in farewell, or in some impossible mixture of all four. And because it never explains, it continues to live. There is something deeply wise in that refusal. Human beings often seek answers from art because life withholds them. We want the painting to tell us what the feeling means, what the symbol stands for, whether love is worth its risks, whether the darkness around the figures is grief or destiny or simply the truth of adulthood. But Gallen-Kallela does not satisfy that hunger. He understands, perhaps, that certain forms of knowledge are damaged by overstatement. The deepest things are not always clarified by definition. Sometimes they are best honored by being shown and left unresolved, like a thought that remains in the room after the speaker has gone silent. What the painting never explains, then, is not a failure of communication. It is part of its form of honesty. Love itself is never fully explained. Why one person enters the center of another life while countless others remain peripheral, why some bonds deepen through hardship while others fracture beneath it, why passion can illuminate one life and destroy another, why tenderness and fear so often arrive together, these questions resist final resolution. The Lovers does not pretend otherwise. It stands before the mystery and shapes it without conquering it. The painting never explains whether the sword belongs to fate or to the lovers themselves. Is it the world that endangers them, or something in their own bond? Is it history intruding into intimacy, or intimacy revealing its own hidden violence? Is it mortality, jealousy, sacrifice, memory, power, or the simple fact that to love anyone is to become woundable? Each possibility feels plausible, and the painting protects them all. In that protection lies its strange generosity. It does not force us into a single doctrine of love. It leaves room for the viewer's own history, and therefore for the work to become newly meaningful in different lives. It also never explains whether the embrace is saving them or trapping them. This ambiguity may be the most haunting of all. We are accustomed to thinking of closeness as rescue. We imagine that the lovers, by holding one another, resist the threat around them. And perhaps they do. But perhaps they are also entangled, unable to separate even when separation might spare them. The painting offers no final judgment. It knows that human bonds are rarely pure enough to be described only as liberation or only as captivity. They are often both and more. We are held by what we love. Whether that holding is grace or burden may change from one moment to the next. Nor does the painting explain how we ought to feel. This is a rare and noble discipline in art. Many works guide emotion clearly. They tell us when to grieve, when to admire, when to fear, when to revere. The Lovers is quieter and more demanding. It asks the viewer to remain morally awake without emotional instruction. Are we meant to mourn these figures, to recognize ourselves in them, to fear for them, to envy their intensity, to recoil from the danger, to accept the contradiction? The painting does not decide. It simply remains before us, and our own response becomes part of the experience. Even more profoundly, the painting never explains whether love's shadow is a problem to be solved. In modern life, we often treat difficulty as something to be managed, clarified, improved, or overcome. But art of this caliber sometimes leads us in the opposite direction. It suggests that there are dimensions of existence not meant for mastery. The sorrow woven into love may not be removable without love itself becoming shallower. The vulnerability that frightens us may also be the very condition that makes attachment meaningful. The painting does not say this directly, but its silence allows the thought to arise. It does not offer a cure because perhaps it understands that no cure is possible without losing something essential. And then there is time, the great unspoken presence in every image of human intimacy. The painting never explains whether this moment lasts. We do not know what came before it or what follows it. Yet the poignancy of the scene depends partly on our awareness that no human moment can remain fixed, no matter how powerfully it is held in paint. That is one of art's tender paradoxes. It preserves what life cannot preserve, but in preserving it, it also reminds us that the original moment is gone. The lovers remain, and yet they do not remain. We see them now because time has passed. We feel their gravity because time passes for us as well. Perhaps that is why the painting becomes especially resonant in quiet hours. It does not demand the bright, alert gaze of daytime certainty. It belongs to the hour when people remember what they cannot solve. It belongs to the inward night, where old loves, losses, questions, and unresolved meanings return without asking permission. In such hours, the lovers does not feel like an artwork alone. It feels like a companion to thought, a visual form of something we have half known all our lives, that beauty does not spare us from sorrow, that closeness does not erase separateness, that love remains luminous precisely because it cannot be secured against time or pain. And still, for all it withholds, the painting gives something unmistakable. It gives permission to remain in complexity without forcing it into conclusion. It gives dignity to the unresolved. It lets love appear not as a moral lesson, not as an idealized solution, but as a profound human condition marked by tenderness, risk, fragility, and depth. It does not console in the ordinary sense. Yet there is consolation in being told the truth without cruelty. There is relief in seeing that ambiguity itself can be beautiful, that contradiction need not be erased to be meaningful. So the painting ends where it began, in an embrace we cannot fully decode, shadowed by a blade we cannot fully name. No moral arrives. No final answer settles the scene. The lovers remain suspended between union and danger, and we remain with them, looking, feeling, thinking, perhaps remembering. What the painting never explains is finally what keeps it alive. It understands that some of the most important things in human life are not propositions to be solved, but presences to be endured. Love is one of them. Loss is one of them. The mystery between two souls is one of them. And in the dark stillness of Gallen-Kallella's The Lovers, all of these remain, unresolved, unforgettable, and quietly true.